Welcome to another great conversation on Think Radio Presents Think People.
Think People is made possible in part by support from the Community Foundation of the Gunnison Valley. To learn how you can make a difference, visit cfgv.org. The Community Foundation, we're here for good.
Become a Think Radio Presents partner at patreon.com, and you'll also get access to premium content you won't find anywhere else. Join us today.
My guest today is recreation therapist Chris Reed. Reed is program director of the Adaptive Sports Center in Crested Butte, Colorado. A lifelong outdoor enthusiast, he got interested in physical therapy after his own knee injury sent him to the sidelines. Then, as a student at the University of Utah, he learned that recreation and therapy actually go hand in hand. Do they ever? All over the country, organizations like Adaptive are thriving, using outdoor adventure as a healing tool for people with limiting conditions of one kind or another. That population ranges from people with developmental disabilities to wounded veterans returning home. To hear Reed tell it, it's life-changing for clients, therapists, and volunteers alike. Chris, thanks for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
I want to start by hearing your story because this is a really cool thing that you get to do every day. I mean, it's a way to give back while you're earning a living. How'd you get here? How do you become Chris Reed?
It's a long story. I think, kind of the cliff notes of it is I was lucky enough to grow up in Colorado Springs and being outside in the mountains and just all of that was a very important part of my life growing up. My dad and my uncle got me outside in the mountains a lot. We climbed peaks, family camping trips, ski trips to Crested Butte. I learned to ski in Crested Butte when I was 3 years old back in the 70s, and it just really kind of built on that. And I think the really fast forward part of that is being outside and outdoor adventure and recreation and doing cool things with cool people was always super important to me, and I was lucky enough to be introduced to that at a very early age. And so when it was time to decide what I wanted to do when I grew up, it was really I struggled with it, to be honest with you, because the idea of a traditional job in a city somewhere in an office or whatever it is, was really kind of didn't seem like a natural fit for me. And I had friends and stuff as, going through high school, all my ski buddies and stuff, they're going off and they're making their decisions and all those decisions about kind of that more traditional job setting, just, I was like, man, I don't want to give up, what I'm going to do. So I kind of went the casual route of, more of a college kind of mixed in with a bit of ski bumming and things like that.
As so many do.
As so many do, especially in this valley. And I was lucky enough to know this valley well. And actually my story goes through Western State here. So I came to Western State. My uncle was a Western State alumni. He's the same guy who got me skiing in Crested Butte when I was a kid. And so in my mind, like, Western State was it. Gunnison, Crested Butte, that's where I was going to go, no question about it. And then I got to school, and I kind of did the first, year and a half of, like, not quite sure what I want to do kind of thing. And
as so many do.
As so many do. And part of my story is I had a really significant knee injury when I was in my early 20s or late teens. And because of that, I went through a physical therapy process. I was like, physical therapy, that's pretty cool. And at the time of all the things that Western offered, they had through their exercise and sports science program, they had pre-physical therapy. And so I was like, of all the things that I could choose to do in the course catalog, that's the one I kind of gravitated to. I started it, enjoyed it, great staff, great professor, meaningful field kind of things. And then just by crazy luck, I went out to Utah, to Salt Lake City, to go skiing for a spring break, and with some friends, and went skied, snowboarded, and all that, did all the classic Salt Lake stuff, and then we went to the University of Utah to see some music. They were having some music on campus, and walking off of campus, I grabbed a course catalog, and didn't think much about it, just threw it in my bag, and flipped it through on the way home, driving across the desert, I was in the back seat, and I saw recreation therapy. I'd never even heard about it before.
Okay, so now we have two things. Yeah. You think therapy's pretty cool, and recreation's really cool.
Yeah, exactly.
You're connecting them together.
And that just grabbed my eye like crazy. and I just gravitated towards that, and it planted the seed. I didn't really react to it, and another fast forward, I had another knee injury. Had to go through another round of surgery and physical therapy. That took me back to Colorado Springs to do that, and a semester at my parents' house while I rehabbed and yada, yada, yada. And of all the things I brought home was in that stack of stuff was that course catalog. And I saw it, and I grabbed it, picked it up, found the department counselor for the University of Utah's program, called her, and then did a road trip out with my folks and checked out the campus and found out more about rec therapy, and I transferred. And that was a fantastic move. And I went from being decent student, you kind of like chugging along, doing my thing and do, to just totally being enthralled and became an A student and on and on.
Yeah, well, so describe that moment. What was it that caused you to cross that threshold from where you were just, okay, this is cool.
Yeah.
If I've got to go to school, if I've got to have a job, it might as well be this,
yeah,
to something that you're really passionate about. How did that happen?
Well, the fact there's really good skiing in Utah didn't hurt, so I knew that could, I knew I wanted to be a place where I could still be outside and stuff, but take school a little bit more seriously, and it just really spoke to me, and my advisor's name in Utah was Kathy Morris, and I'll not forget, and she was just awesome, and she spoke with a lot of passion about the field and what it does and the different settings you can go on. A lot more versatile than physical therapy. Rec therapy has a route where you can go community or outdoor based, and that's kind of what I'm doing here in Crested Butte at the Adaptive Sports Center. And then there's also a clinical track for like rehab hospitals and facilities like that, and I obviously gravitated towards the more outdoor based side of things. And it just, she spoke highly of it, and at that time I thought, the change of, a different setting and different environment, all that was great, and I just decided, like driving home from that trip, I was like, I'm going to do it, and that is history.
And here you are,
and here I am.
And so adaptive sports. That's not a real intuitive phrase. Sometimes it's hard for people to understand even what that means. I would like to take a moment and talk about the history of this kind of therapy, because it hasn't always been true that people with disabilities had opportunities like this. Yeah. It's really a relatively recent thing, is it not?
Yeah, and kind of the history of it and long history of it, but after World War II, American Western cultures, people started having more time for leisure activities and things like this. So that wasn't always the case in human history. Like the idea of leisure and free time and things like that. That was something historically speaking reserved for the more wealthy people in society before the Industrial Revolution and stuff and things. But after World War II, there was obviously a lot of people coming back injured, and it started in kind of rehab hospitals and things like that, like finding things for the injured soldiers to do during their rehab and after they got released from the hospital and things like that. So it was a kind of a slow, grinding start. Then it really got its kind of a really good shot in the arm with becoming more of a profession in after the Vietnam era, so going into the 70s. And that's when therapeutic recreation really started picking off, and you could actually go get a degree and a certification and things like that in it.
Well, and if you were a disabled person, you had somewhere you could go.
You had somewhere to go, and you started getting experts, and then with that became advances in equipment, and advances in prosthetics, and advances in techniques to guide and teach people how to do these things. And so it kind of started chugging along with there. And then from that, it started filtering into the general, just general community of, different disabilities and different populations, and, everything from physical rehab to mental health and, school settings and school districts and everything. So it's really found everywhere, and it's becoming more and more kind of specialized with the settings and populations and things like that. And then programs like ours in Crested Butte, there's numerous throughout the country. Colorado has a lot of them. They are obviously becoming very specialized in what they do with the outdoor piece, like the high adventure piece makes it very specialized with the equipment and the length of visits and risk management and all these things that we do.
Yeah, so you're talking about high adventure now. That's kind of the trend that has developed over the decades. Yeah. Where did it start? When recreation therapy first began, what sort of things were people going out to do?
Oh, it was a lot of, kind of more camp and traditional kind of more low-key things. So traditional court sports, and also like more the leisure aspects of recreation. So, things like bowling and going to sporting events and some more kind of passive things perhaps. And then the high adventure stuff kind of really came to be, as far as I know. There's a few key programs in the 70s and early 80s that really started pushing the envelope with taking people out and doing more high adventure things.
Yeah.
Hal O'Leary in Winter Park at the National Sports Center for the Disabled, which I was lucky enough, he taught me how to be a river guide back in the early stages of my career, and he was a force to be reckoned with, and he started in the ski industry and then it branched out into summer. Some guys up in Idaho had a program called CW Hog. They were quickly on his tails with some things, and they were definitely more like outdoor adventure, mountaineering based. And then a large program up in Maine was kind of on the cutting edge with with adaptive ski programming at kind of a high performance level.
But you'd mentioned it. There's mountaineering, there's rafting, there's sailing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Really, would you say there's anything that a disabled person can't do?
No. I mean, it's all so much of his mindset and the desire to get out there and find the solution to whatever the challenge is.
Yeah.
And that's where we're there to help, is to facilitate that along. And you pick the activity and you find the right amount of passion, people will figure out a way to get it done.
Yeah. There had to be some resistance at first, I would think, to the idea of, people who were at less than full physical capacity, let's put it that way, putting them on a raft.
Yeah.
That's a risky thing to do.
It is.
How did the industry or the programming overcome that resistance?
Yeah, well, and you still see it a bit. A lot of it is just creating an understanding. The folks that tend to question if what you're doing is quote unquote safe. Nothing we truly do is safe. There's risk to everything. Mm-hmm. So our job as facilitators, as professionals in the industry, is to try to mitigate that risk and still provide a really good experience. And that's where the systems and the equipment is so key. And also staff knowledge is, that's the most important thing, is staff knowledge and the understanding of the activity and the understanding of what I call the crystal ball, things that could potentially happen as we go through this process, no matter what the activity is. And then, and back in the early days, there's a lot more resistance, but as people started proving that this stuff could be done well and professionally and with good outcomes and probably in a lot of ways less incidents than the mainstream mainstream adventure world is seeing, then it becomes more and more accepted. And it's really like when I first got in this industry, people were like, to see an adaptive skier on the slopes was, back in my days in Winter Park, 25 years ago, it was still a really unusual thing.
You didn't see that very much.
You didn't see it very much. And now you go to a ski area, especially in the ski industry and adaptive sports has gotten so key that most ski areas, it's rare not to see an adaptive skier if you go out for more than a few days. And then you come to programs like the Adaptive Sports Center or Breckenridge the outdoor, or Breckenridge, the BOEC, Breckenridge Outdoor Education Center, and NSCD in Winter Park, and the big program in Park City. We're doing thousands and thousands of activities a year, each one of those programs. So it's every single day that there's an adaptive skier in there. So it's become a very normal thing. And I think with that becomes acceptance, and then with acceptance is more, becomes innovation. With innovation, you're allowed to push the envelope more, and it's just that cycle, and that cycle never stops.
Yeah. Well, is there a typical client that you work with?
No, I think, there's typical diagnosis, but every individual is super unique.
So really the question is, what sorts of people are good candidates for, coming to you or somewhere else in the country?
So a good candidate is someone who wants to get outside and do something cool. I mean, that's really the qualifier. Our program, we serve over 23 different diagnoses, everything from developmental disabilities to acquired disabilities from trauma and everything in between. And the common thread is people want to get outside and do something cool. So, there's a big assessment process. There's a lot of intake forms with about the disability, about medications, about whatever that individual has going on in their life. And then there's a goal setting phase, and then there's the facilitation phase. and it goes on. So, but yeah, the common thread is just the desire to get out there and do something cool and be outside and be with friends and family. And, the motivation isn't really much different than if you and I are the same reason we get out there and do those things.
Right. And yet I can see that the outcomes would be very different for these people.
The outcomes are super powerful. And that's the coolest thing about it. Kind of the kind of catch-all phrase, if I can do this, I can do anything. You hear that mentioned a lot of different programs will use that, and there's a lot of truth to that. I think a lot of people with disabilities and special needs, no matter if you're born with it, if you acquire it, whatever the case may be, that's where social bias starts coming in, or personal bias, like I can't do these things, or you can't do these things, depending on what side of the table you're sitting on. So go out and to do something, if you lose a limb in a car accident and you have a hard time overcoming that, then you come here with your rehab hospital and go ice climbing. All of a sudden, day-to-day life doesn't seem that complicated, as far as getting around with your new prosthetic or whatever the case may be. And so that's just one example of many. So really, it's our job to set up a really cool experience that allows people to realize what they're capable of doing. And that's essentially what we do with our rehab programs. We work with some of the finest rehab programs across the rehab facilities, clinical facilities from across the country. And we have therapists and physicians making a visit to adaptive part of the rehab process. So when the patients go out on their own, they have a better understanding of what they're capable of, what their equipment does, or what their new reality is, or some it's ongoing. And some of these rehab facilities have really good outpatient programs where people continue to get services, and then they come through on through those programs. And that is, our job is to push the limits a little bit and have people realize what they're capable of. And our ultimate goal is to make it where people don't need us anymore. I always joke it's a terrible business model.
Yeah,
we lose money on every lesson, and we're trying not to make them come back because we want them to be independent.
Well, there's no shortage of people in need, that's for sure.
No shortage, yeah.
But I'm thinking about these outcomes. It's not just the person who has some special need or disability. It's their friends and their family who also come away saying, wait, you did what?
Yeah.
How does that change the dynamic?
It changes a lot.
Life?
I think the classic example of that are parents. A lot of parents, and I think a lot of parents have kids with disabilities. They're overly protective sometimes, to use kind of a catch-all phrase, or they're not quite sure, and then they see their son or their daughter out having a really good experience and being incredibly capable, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, they can do this. What else can they do? And or they go home and they're like, okay, we had a great ski experience or a great summer experience. We're gonna get our kids involved in this program, closer to home or whatever. So it really starts to open the doors for the people that come through, and we have a lot of. We have some surveys and we get a lot of really cool metrics about we see incredible rates of increased self-confidence and peer networking and overall efficacy of the belief they can do more things than they thought they could. And and really what it comes down to is creating the realization that that healthy leisure lifestyle is so important, just having a good a good overall life, and
that's not gone.
And that's not gone, and it's probably, if you have a disability, it's probably more important than ever, because to really take good care of yourself and to eat right and to maintain a good weight and to get exercise in the ways that are realistic for you and things like that. I mean, that goes a long way to combat your other inherent challenges you might have with your disability. One of the coolest things we see is people come through and they either have a really good first experience, and there's all sorts of different scenarios. You really can't boil it down to Sue, but some of the common ones, they really have an awesome experience. It takes them by storm. They leave. They get really into whatever they did, whether it be biking or skiing or climbing or water-based activities, whatever it is. And then they start to pursue those things. And all of a sudden they have a healthy interest, and they meet a really cool group of people at their hometown or in those same things. Or we see someone who come in and maybe they weren't so prepared. Maybe they weren't the fittest they could have been. They had a frustrating experience, but we facilitate that. And that's a very powerful thing as well. And if you facilitate the frustration right, we see people come back the next time their visit and they drop some weight, and they've been lifting weights, and they're stronger, and they're ready because they want to have a really good week in Crested Butte.
Yeah,
so
they didn't like the way it went the first time.
they didn't like the way the first time, and that's a humongous motivator. And it's also a great motivator for their therapist that they're there with to see, or their spouse, or whatever it is, to be like, hey, our trip to Crested Butte's coming up, in 3 months. Like, get out and get some exercise, or start doing your routine to get fit for the trip.
Well, wow, as I said at the top of the show, really, it's an amazing thing to be able to say that you're in the business of changing lives. Can you think of an example, a story that you would share with us of somebody that really inspired you?
Oh God, it's a long list. The first thing that pops in my mind is I was lucky enough to we do some VI, some visually impaired and blind mountaineering, and we had a gal come up from Colorado Springs, and she was completely blind. She had lost her sight to a degenerative eye disease as she's gotten older, and she was only in her early 50s, I think. She was by no means old. And she lived a very normal kind of suburban life, and kind of did her thing, and they had their interests and stuff. And a friend of hers who she knew through through her network of people with blindness and visual impairments, called her up, said, I'm going to Crested Butte on a blind mountaineering thing. Do you want to join me? And at first she was like, no.
Yeah,
and then
are you kidding?
She called, and we talked to her about what it would be like. And she's like, I don't know. And then she called back. And long story short, she ended up joining the trip. And we went to Fossil Ridge Wilderness, and it was a week-long trip. And essentially she went from, pretty low-key suburban lifestyle to so many numerous peaks up by Mill Lake, and left just different, like very excited. And she started skiing, and they now go to Breckenridge on a regular basis because that's an easy day's drive from the springs. And
there you go.
And the whole time she's like, God, my husband and kids aren't going to believe I did this, and get some, she went all the photos and get some pictures, and she went from being, the first part of it, from being really kind of unsure and almost like just quiet, almost intimidated the first, the first few days. Yeah, first few days of the trip, and really kind of sussing out the setting. And by the end of the trip, like just on cloud nine, talking and sharing ideas and talking about all the places that she wanted to go and experience in life that she hadn't had a chance to. And so that's the first one I can think of. But there are, we see it every day, and that's the amazing part. And I'm an administrator these days, so I spend a lot of time at the desk and working on more of the administrative side of things. But I got a straight eye shot over to the program office, and I interact with a lot of participants, and we have a big staff, and people are out. We do lessons every single day, and that type of story happens every day, times 10. Day in and day out, both seasons. So it's really cool.
And so it's interesting to note that we're not just talking about people with physical disabilities, right? I mean, you do a fair amount of work with PTSD. Do you do things as, I hate to call it as routine, as commonplace as depression? People who come that are just, they need something to help them out of a mental illness that has really pushed them down. Is that some of the things that you do as well?
We do. We provide activities for at-risk youth, which depression is a big part of that. Generally speaking, within the disabled community, there's different levels of ongoing depression things because of just if you acquire a disability, I think you go through like a spinal cord injury or an amputation or lose your sight or whatever. You go through depression as part of like accepting your new reality, and not for everyone, but it's pretty common. And the clinical therapists really work on that a lot, when they're doing their inpatient things, but then they're released out to the world because, most clinical stays these days are short. And so coming to programs like ours and opening up those doors, it's a really good way to, to kind of combat that and, have an interest in motivations and peers and just cool things to talk about with your friends and family. Man, that's so much of like getting out of that rut, and that's something that we think is really important.
And do you see powerful outcomes there as well? Yeah,
we see high changes in motivation. We teamed up with a PhD student numerous years ago, and he did a research diagnosis on mood state with our participants, and the mood state really is a noticeable increase. after the visit. And I think a lot of that is just realizing like, oh, I can do these things, or these options out here. And I'm still blown away. You know, I've been doing this for a long, long time, and every year, at least a few times a year, we have people come in and had no idea it was available. You know, for whatever reason, they live in whatever town, USA, and they decided to join their family for the ski trip to Crested Butte, and they just figured that they would, you know, kind of relax during the day while everyone skied and stuff. And you know, Crested Butte being the friendly town it is, everyone will be like, oh, you know, they'll see them in a wheelchair or on whatever the apparatus.
Are you here to go to adaptive?
Are you here at that? And they'll be like, what's adaptive? And then the next day they're in the office like, hey, can we get a lesson? And you know, they may have been injured for 10 years and not known it was a possibility. And that's getting better. Most rehab centers are doing a really good job of taking their patients through what's available, like with the trips I was talking about earlier, where they actually come through as a part of their clinical experience. But there's people out there that don't know that they can do these things, and then they find out, and that's a game changer. You know, the coolest thing is you can say, you know, there's a big difference between saying I'm a person with a spinal cord injury or whatever it is to I'm a skier. You know, that's a very different mindset. Or I'm a climber, I'm a mountain biker. That's a very different mindset. And with that, I'm a skier, I'm a climber, I'm a mountain biker, that's a whole network of cool people you get involved in, whether it's part of the other adaptive riders or not. It's usually a mix, you know. And so the web is big and wide in a great way.
Yeah, there's powerful therapy just in that, in naming yourself something other than your disability.
Yeah.
I'm also interested to see. I mean, I think I know the answer. Just sitting here looking at you, I can tell that you're affected by this work. But it's got to also be powerfully transformative for the people who volunteer to go out on these trips. Yeah. Well, what can you tell us about that? I mean, what do you see among those people?
I think you see a lot of the same effects, to be honest with you. We work with a program called Piece of Adventure, and it's a program that's kind of the foundation is that the experience is as powerful for the volunteer it is for the participant, and they're looking to find that common thread with how that relationship builds over the course of time. And our volunteers are in so many different ways, you know, and it's the people who are firsthand on the activities. No doubt they're seeing the experience firsthand, and that's really motivating to them. But our volunteer network is so wide that it's also our funders and our volunteer board of directors and our event volunteers who help make these things possible through the funding side, and obviously the service volunteers and our interns and our staff. And so just that network of everyone really, I mean, the broad spectrum of everyone truly chipping in any way they can to provide these experiences for people. I mean, that's a powerful thing, and that's a really powerful community to be involved with, and that's just here in Crested Butte. And we're chapter members of Disabled Sports USA, which puts us into a bigger network of other adaptive programs, and then we share ideas with other programs and stuff. So the network starts getting really big, and you see that same level of motivation throughout all the programs, whether they're in Colorado or Utah or in the Northeast somewhere or whatever. It's a very common theme.
You know, it's a well-documented trend these days across the country that volunteerism is kind of in steep decline. A lot of organizations are having a hard time sustaining programming because they can't find the people willing to volunteer time. Are you seeing that?
No, I think we're staying pretty steady. I mean, we've always had an incredibly sound network of volunteers, a lot for the reasons I just named. And I think one of the nice things about living in a mountain town like Gunnison, Crested Butte, Breckenridge, whatever the case may be, is the people who live in these towns are typically pretty spirited, right? Like they love being out.
True.
They love they're pretty intrinsically motivated people to go do cool things. And extroverts is the word I was looking for. They're pretty extroverted people, and they really want to get involved with cool things. And so I think mountain town communities are fantastic for that type of energy and recruitment and things like that. What's going on in other communities, I'm not as tapped in with bigger cities. But if that's the case, I'd hope that we can figure out a way to, because there's all sorts of good organizations out there that need good people.
Well, it's probably easier for you to connect people to the idea that they're changing lives because they see it happening right in front of them.
That's the feedback is immediate for sure.
Yeah. And so if I'm a family member of someone, or maybe I'm a disabled person listening to this broadcast, how's it work? What's the first step?
Super easy. Well, we try to make it as easy as possible. First step is to give a call and have a conversation about what you're interested in and make sure it's a good fit. Not all activities are great for all populations, so there is some of that moves around a little bit. But most activities can be adapted for most populations. So generally speaking, you can probably do what you want to do. And then it's all about that first inquiry. And then for our program, it's first inquiry, answer some basic questions. We have a registration form process. You pick your dates. You get registered for the program, you book your travel, you get your lodging, you come up. We have a scholarship program. If people need help financially for the activities, we scholarship a ton. And we're lucky enough, our program's really strong financially right now, so we're lucky enough to offer that. And we have a policy right now, we don't turn anyone away due to financial concerns. So that is great. And we have there's an application for that just to kind of decide on what a reasonable amount of assistance is and things like that. And then the trip happens, and the first level of assessment is that registration form. It's super important. And then you arrive in Crested Butte, and you go through the assessment, what type of equipment you want. You set up some trip goals just so we make sure we're all on the same page for what the experience should be as far as like tempo and time and intensity and all that kind of stuff. And then you go go out and get after it.
Well, it doesn't sound painful to me.
No, it's really cool. It's exciting.
So do it.
Do it. Yeah. Do it. And there is Disabled Sports USA website lists every single adaptive program in the country. So no matter where people are listening from, odds are there's something fairly close to them to get involved.
Something nearby.
Yeah. And our program's unique. Some of the high mountain town programs in Colorado are unique because we're not really close to anything. We're far away from population bases and big airports and things like that.
Yeah.
So, it is Telluride would fall in that boat. There is a little bit extra effort it takes to get here. I mean, the reward is you have, a beautiful mountain valley.
Then you're here.
You're here. We see longer stays. No one's really coming up to us for a day. People are usually coming for multiple days just because of the distance and things like that. So every program kind of has its own, its own clientele who kind of are looking for something.
Well, the other thing that we'll close with is if you're listening and you've been thinking about volunteering to do anything, think about this.
This is a great thing to volunteer for.
Yeah.
And just volunteering in general.
Just get out there and do something. Help somebody.
I agree 100%.
All right.
Yeah.
Chris, thank you so much for joining me. Great conversation.
Hi. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Think Radio Presents is a production of Alan Morris Media. The show's producer is Isa Forrest. Associate producer, Aaron Lewis.
Thanks for listening. Become a Think Radio Presents partner at patreon.com, and you'll also get access to premium content you won't find anywhere else. To leave a comment on today's show or to suggest a great story for a future episode, visit thinkradiopresents.com. Tune in next week for another great conversation on Think Radio Presents Think People.